Hi, my name is Ethan Barnhart, founder of Vulcan Digital, and today I'm going to be discussing migrating high ground cyber out of a messy dual tenant situation with Zoho Sales and HubSpot CRM into Dynamics 365 for sales and marketing to reduce their vendor complexity and customize their CRM for their unique business needs as a cybersecurity consulting company. So let's start with what people are feeling in the moment, and right now they're feeling pretty hemmed in. There's key use cases and data true of the marketing and sales side of the house that's being split across HubSpot and Zoho Sales respectively, and it's actually requiring an outside data provider at the moment to periodically synchronize between the two, and it's having mixed results. Neither platform is particularly accommodating to the record customization that either would necessarily want or ask for, and none of it is by nature pertaining to professional services organizations. It's more catering to a typical retail environment or situation where I sell you something once, it's marked as closed and completed, and the dollar value on that sale is really easy to understand because I just sold a box of something. The combination of the different CRM vendors in place here is becoming too expensive, and the straw that broke the camel's back here was actually DocuSign, a background supporting actor here that you're using for e-signatures, raised their prices on the yearly enterprise license. And at that point, it caused everyone to take a step back and look at the difficulties and the complexity in handling all of these different vendors for a mediocre result that didn't fit us, and the cost involved in all of it, and just decide to rip everything up at the roots and replace it with something that's better suited for high ground as an organization. Some starting requirements here to define the problem. We need an all-in-one CRM solution capable of doing email marketing, hosting landing pages, and collecting submissions from web forms like HubSpot is currently capable of doing. And the solution is going to have to be cheaper or at an equivalent cost and greater value than the combined cost of HubSpot, Zoho, the data provider, and these background actors like DocuSign moving forward. And the solution should also be capable of using customizable records and processes to capture those service delivery details unique to Highground's offerings and accommodate a multi-product sales journey that isn't linear. I can get into some concrete examples of this. Some limiting cases here. Selling in Vistage requires knowledge of the group's memberships, geographies where those groups are at, their chair, and how the members and chairs relate to one another in a network, because there's both a hierarchy of chairs to each other and how groups interrelate to each other and how the members roll up into individual groups and potentially move between groups. The sale of cybersecurity programs, as a for instance, require the prior sale and execution of a due diligence assessment from High Ground Cyber. There are instances where you cannot move from A to B to C in the sales process as separate products in an overall sales journey without taking the first one into account. High Ground wouldn't take on a client for a cyber program management exercise if they didn't do a due diligence exercise first. We have to know what we're stepping into, and the client needs to know where they're at and where they need to be going and what that would look like on a program path. High Ground sells both one-time transactions and multi-year service contracts with recurring revenue, sometimes in the same sentence, on the same invoices, in the same deals with the same clients at the same time, which has a huge impact on the quality of deal valuation in Zoho at the moment and the quality of the forecasting or any reporting we could pull out of that tool. It just degraded the faith in the tool entirely. So our game plan for Dynamics 365 as a result of all of this is we're going to have to consolidate our objects and processes to one vendor and one platform to get rid of that complexity issue. And we're going to customize that CRM to the business needs that High Ground's outlined. We're going to gather in all the operational control over these resources in the same cloud environment using the same cloud provider as our existing resources up in Azure. That also has security ramifications for us, where as a security company, we can better enforce the boundaries around these platforms. We can move laterally to Adobe Sign for cost bundling advantages with our existing cloud creative licenses that we have in place and the single sign-on integration that we got with Adobe. So we can leverage certain aspects of this that are already in place to double dip. You can see all of these get compiled into additional resources that I'm not going to read through here, but you can pause and read through if you like. So moving into the solution architecture here and walking our way down the problem. These are all the different areas where Dynamics is going to be able to plug into the rest of our environment for future automation opportunities or advantages. First would be images and content in an Azure storage account. A lot of Cloud Forward Dynamics 365 is stored in Azure storage tables or Azure blob storage under the hood. So that's where we're keeping our images for email templates. It's where we're keeping form submissions from landing pages. It's where we're keeping videos for customer testimonials or anything of that nature. We're going to be integrating into the company website so we can do form embeddings and iframes for landing pages or for those contact us forms, and they're going to have to drop out somewhere in a way that Dynamics 365 gets to handle. We're going to integrate with Cloudflare DNS here. We have to make DNS changes to MX records and text records to turn on the email analytics tracking and the website traffic tracking that almost any CRM is really capable of if it's capable of doing marketing activities. And it's going to integrate with Adobe Sign. Dynamics 365 by default has an on-rails integration process with Adobe Sign in the administrator settings. So again, double dipping and finding advantages wherever we can. In terms of the tools and frameworks used throughout this process, XRM Toolbox is a big one. My first internship at 14 was dealing with Dynamics 365 and making some customizations to records and places back when it was still an on-prem solution, before Microsoft had ever gone cloud forward with things like Power Apps. And both then and now, XRM Toolbox probably has to be the single biggest player in this space and the single most effective tool in getting past the guardrails in places and the UI helpers and limitations that stop being a help and more of a hindrance at a certain point, so you can get into the guts of a Dynamics 365 solution and make the customizations you need to make. SQL Server Management Studio, not so much for the SQL aspects, but in some places, yes, it's more so leveraging the data import workflows that were available inside of SQL Server Management Studio, taking things in an Excel format and dropping them into more of a table format. Redgate is a fantastic data manipulation tool, and the reason I mention it here is because I used it in places where it was just genuinely faster than the alternative of hunting and pecking through large Excel spreadsheets when you're doing deduplication or data enrichment exercises. The amount of data that Redgate can hold at once in a single context and allows you to browse back and forth between, and the tools they have for enrichment or finding duplicates and removing them in a single click meant that the time spent between actions to get to an end result came way down. Redgate is an awesome tool. Other tools being used are just your typical M365 Excel for going through the exports and the imports of data as it's moving between platforms. The Word developer tools for putting in XML parameters and placeholders on final sales documents that you get to see when I automate the production of sales documents with Word templates. I can replace something in a table or in a paragraph with an XML parameter that links to a record or an association up in the CRM sales system, and then in one click as an end result, generate a final sales document using all of those parameters. Finally, I would say Power BI, because Power BI is hugely instrumental in reporting, especially in these kinds of stacks, and it's what we use to generate our final set of sales dashboards that I will be showing off at the end of this talk. The first step in all of this is going to be just getting the data in and out. We're moving apartments. So it's migrating, it's exporting the data out of these disparate platforms. And these platforms are going to be referring to the same information in different ways using different schemas. So it's pulling up wherever they've decided to plant their fence posts on common sets of data, and then deduplicating and deconflicting in places where they speak about the same things in slightly different ways, and then finally transforming all of that data into a schema and the correct record sets that Dynamics understands for import. So performed a full ingress on all of that from those two platforms, enrich the records with tools like Norbert or Hunter with publicly available information, and there's gaps on contacts or accounts or websites, and doing that mapping exercise to get everything into Dynamics. Getting the records into the sandbox CRM environment meant it was time to start making customizations and actually following up on use cases and real sales needs inside the organization that we knew existed. First of all is the complexity and confusion around Vistage. Vistage as an ecosystem has a lot of interdependent and circular relationships between individuals that could change at the drop of a hat. So how are you going to handle this complex web of stuff going on at any given point in time. You can kind of see with the representation in front of you how all of this can come together. Two things to implement right away, two different records. One is a chair and one is a group, because groups inside of Vistage are made up of multiple members that can come or go at any given point in time, and groups can have one chair or multiple chairs in a main and co model. And then a chair can be responsible for any number of groups. So there's a many-to-many relationship going back and forth between these. And amongst group members, or those inside of a single group, someone can leave and rejoin as a result of changing companies. Somebody can be a part of a Ohio group and then relocate to Indiana and show up again as a member of that Indiana group. And if you're making periodic updates to the CRM system because you're importing new lead records, this has the opportunity to bite you really quick with duplicate information, people you already know, companies you already know that have slightly different information now, and which one's supposed to be authoritative. Are they in Ohio? Are they in Indiana? Things like this pop up all the time. So it's about, keeping these two types of records straight with the relationships, building corresponding contact and account records for each of the members inside of a group, and then deconflicting and being able to handle duplicate information or conflicting information as it arrives inside of the CRM system to handle this complex network of people with each other, and then also with respect to authoritative positions like a Vistage chair. One of the very first things that High Ground was clamoring for was effective lead scoring, being able to focus their attention in the correct places by some KPI or helpful metric. Now, every CRM system is going to guarantee lead scoring out of the box and with varying degrees of efficacy. And nowadays, they'll even tell you it's machine learning enabled and the AI will do it for you and be a better judge of fit than any human ever could be with enough time and data. And that's probably true for a lot of business models, but High Ground had a very particular definition of what it wanted. It had a well-defined perfect prospect profile, and it needed to be able to see inside of the PPP to look at the underlying factors that qualify or disqualify in that final score, which means that it can't be a black box machine learning exercise. We have to be able to interrogate for that lower level information. Now, this information is being stored in one respect or another. Either it's an out-of-box field that was true of something like an account is going to have a company revenue field, and it's going to have a number of employees field by default. But others had to be added and pulled on in different respects. And the way that this would work is that all of these things would be aggregated by relation to a final account record, and then assign different weights and run through a series of calculations that boiled down to a 0 to 1 sliding scale in terms of fit that's represented as a percentage, or by kind of a bond valuation letter grade scoring to say anything above 90% is good, and you're going from A, AA, AAA to anything below 90% where it drops off in quality precipitously. Now, the PPP is going to be made up of 7 distinct factors, and I'll go through them briefly here. Company revenue has to do with the fact that there is a such thing as a cyber poverty line. High Ground's business model was aimed directly at small and mid-market businesses, and it had done everything possible to solve the cyber affordability problem. Most companies might try the approach of hiring one full-time qualified cyber professional for something like $120,000 a year, but High Ground could offer for 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar, a fractional access to 5 or 6 qualified and specialized cybersecurity professionals, for the 10 hours a month that you might actually need it as a small or medium-sized business. So you're able to get more effective work product out the door that better suits your needs. And then you're not dealing with the cultural problems the cybersecurity professional would have to deal with if they're expected to be a jack of all trades on everything cybersecurity for a much higher burden cost of labor. But even that being the case, the weird thing about cybersecurity most times is that a CISO is expected to interface directly with the CEO and with other executive functions within the organization, but most of their funding is still run through as a proportion of the IT budget. And if you're sub $10 million in annual revenue as an organization, the chances of your IT budget being anything more than shoestrings means that you might not even be able to afford what Highground can offer you. So it must be this tall to ride. And if you're dealing with a managed service provider, and that's the primary answer by which you're accomplishing your IT needs, then it's even worse, because you're adding somebody who isn't a stakeholder into the conversation and having to interface through a ton of extra people that may degrade security outcomes or just the way a program might work and the timelines. It's too much of a headache. Next would be company headcount, because most people believe that your risk in cybersecurity has to do with your technology, when in reality it's people. People clicking on things are the reason why incidents happen. And the kind of data that you're handling and the kind of data that they handle in the ways they do are what create your legal risk or your compliance risk. So those are the primary drivers of a real need for cybersecurity in your business and any valid business case to operate sustainably with cyber as part of the picture. Next would be incident history, and this would be pretty obvious. We don't want anybody with active incidents in the last 90 days, because Highground is not in the business of ambulance chasing. It's in the business of consulting, and it's not anyone's meat shield. So if you had a payroll event or a ransomware event, Highground is not there to talk to your insurance company on your behalf or notify third parties that were impacted by your incident, or, talk to anyone involved in any active investigations if it's legal in nature. It's just not enough to go. It's too much to go off of with no information, and too much opportunity for reputational damage to the company. Industry, Highground makes a concerted effort of dealing with manufacturing, telecommunications, and engineering services, because these are companies that employ a lot of people. They have war chests of IP that are sought after by foreign nation states and threat actors. They want to pillage as much as possible so that they can undercut a manufacturer in international markets, or they can steal particular technologies from engineering services, or gain access to things that they really shouldn't have access to inside of telecommunications environments. And Highground would rather take on those battles than engage in overregulated markets like finance or medical or aerospace or defense contracting, because the amount of extra work on top of the work that's there in terms of compliance and the way you attain work and the way you keep work is just kind of a barrier to entry for a small team of consultants. This next one might be kind of surprising, but stand your ground. There is a pretty huge bifurcation and understanding on the topic and willingness to do something about it, based in a great degree on, well, at least what we've found in looking at the data. It co-varies with people's political stances in their state. Like a red state that has a stand your ground castle doctrine understanding of how to solve your problems is going to hear issues on cybersecurity in a very different way than somebody who lives in a blue state with duty to retreat and wait for the authorities to help you kind of understanding. The practical difference between those two mindsets is, one hears the talk and their frontier mindset says, I want to be able to protect myself and my family and my property, and what do I have to do about it to be safe? And the other one says, this is fear mongering, this is scary, you're just trying to be mean to me, and waiting for the authorities to arrive is a perfectly acceptable answer. And one has closed revenue with Highground and ends up drastically more secure in 2 years, and the other one gets hit for a ransomware event, calls the FBI field office, finds out there's an 18-month backlog, and then they call us, and there's a little bit of an I told you so conversation. So the next one would be cyber strategy. Highground has been very clear from the beginning that the whole point of this is not ROI. So it's not a return on investment that you could possibly gain for spending time with cybersecurity. It's a strategic advantage for these companies in particular in manufacturing and engineering, who have to bid on contracts in B2B work. And there's requirements in there for things like quality of service delivery in ISO, or data and security handling requirements in things like NIST. That if you have those in place and you have the stamp next to your name, then you can take somebody else's lunch money in a big way. You can outbid on work, or you can attain more work. And for the people who are behind the ball in this problem, you can go on M&A, mergers and acquisitions sprees to expand your business that way as well. So it is a strategic advantage that if people are bought into, can pursue. lastly would be product interest, because we had a variety of products that met people where they were at, and the portfolio was meant to service a wide variety of need. So if they ever expressed interest in something that was unique to their situation, we would want to capture that. Getting an understanding of which leads are a good fit for the organization is a good place to start. Like, geez, that person's a swell guy, but that's really all it tells you if you don't ask the question of what are they fit for? What am I selling them, and what's my priority? And this is where sales playbooks came into play as a record that I had to create. I want to be able to feather in a blend of different types of revenue, because High Ground has multiple revenue lines with different inflow mechanisms. Hardware and software resale is a one-time transaction that's great for a quick hit in cash flow. And High Ground has professional services that are great for long-term cash flow stability and the predictability of revenue, because it's a contract in ink with a monthly service rate that happens over the span of 3 years. So depending on which clients are available to have a conversation about expanded work or renewals, or what the speaking circuit is looking like, or what people's appetite is for particular kinds of firewalls or other added services, you could be in a season where you got to pick a blend of one and the other as your ideal target for quarterly sales activities. So you're going to stack rank all of those, include what kinds of things you'd like to sell, and then those individual products are going to be suited for different people based off of those fundamentals inside of the PPP. So what this would do is you would establish your playbook for the quarter, and then with that quarter, every time that lead scoring mechanism was being calculated in the background, it was being reweighted according to how these products impact the PPP and impact the underlying connotations of those fundamental aspects of the PPP back to the strength of fit with regards to the products you're trying to sell and sell the most of. So, I mean, just per the visual here, you can kind of understand the concept is that if I were to move this sliding scale in the blend between different revenue lines, it would drastically change the lead scoring on individual accounts or contacts based off of their fit against what you're trying to sell. The addition of the playbooks allowed for a lot of laser focus on the correct leads to go and pursue in the day-to-day sales operations, and we're doing the same basic set of activities of just little daily life wins in multiple areas, and the next area to go and explore is marketing journeys. Now, a front-to-back planned automated marketing journey was one of the major selling points that convinced us Dynamics was the correct move. The ability to move out of the HubSpot reality of manually assembling lists every time you want to send an email, sending emails individually, not as one per recipient, but as one per email blast that still had to be created and customized for the relevant conversation that needed to be had, and build the list and do all of that was a massive drain on people who were doing marketing activities. So, creating numerous email templates and boilerplate messages as follow-up from Vistage events, and then creating those automated chains of email and SMS journeys that reminded them that reports and resources from High Ground were ready for them, to encourage them to schedule meetings using their scheduling tool, all of those things on a pre-approved happy path that you could take off of the shelf and run at any time, meant that half a day of work inside of HubSpot got replaced with automated launches of those journeys, query lists that were smart, that filtered in real time based off of a set of criteria that we could actively control, and then more effective follow-up, because as soon as a Vistage event that Ken was speaking at was finished, we could have follow-up emails running out to those people, thanking them for their time in the matter of hours after that event had concluded. Huge efficiency gains there on just improving daily quality of life for the people inside of these tools. So now it's time to address the three-headed monster that's been hiding under the bed. And it may have more than 3 heads at a time, because you take one off and 2 more appear. Any CRM system is going to be perfectly suited to handle individual transactions, one-time revenue events, and that's going to be accurately reflected in the valuation of the deals that come through your pipeline. That's the simplest thing there is to deal with. But I mean, some CRM platforms are also going to be really well equipped to handle recurring revenue events like a subscription model. High Ground has one-time revenue events, it has recurring revenue on contracts for a fixed term in years, and it's also got projects with 50% up front as a deposit, and then another 50% due at completion with an indeterminate time to delivery because the client has the most control over that timetable. So with all of this revenue in the air that could be realized at any given point in time, how do you tie that back down to the correct deal with the correct valuation on said deal once it's closed, and how do you reconcile that back to your quarterly revenue and sales targets? Inside of the high ground team, a revenue target is synonymous with a sales target. You either hit your final number for the quarter or you don't. So there's a number of different ways that this can become problematic, right? Because just because I, as a salesperson in quarter one, close a 3-year contract worth X amount of dollars over the entire lifetime of the contract doesn't mean I've realized all of that revenue at once, and it shouldn't count toward the quarterly revenue target when the company doesn't actually experience that revenue in that time span. And the point of a Q1 revenue target is to say we will make X amount of money in top line this quarter. I will be able to see it come through the door. So to answer that particular aspect of the problem, the fastest way of handling it is to create a recurring revenue object for those multi-year contract opportunities to address those cash flow questions. If I close that deal with 42 days left in the quarter, I didn't realize the entire value of the contract. I realized the first month of that contract's value on a monthly billing cycle, and that's what will be included in the valuation of that deal when I close it against those quarterly revenue and sales targets. With regards to projects, the fastest way of handling that is to acknowledge that this is not an ERP solution. We do not want this to be an ERP solution. So including all of these additional service delivery details and statuses on projects and handling operations or project coordination and outcomes inside of a CRM solution, way outside the scope of what we're discussing. Let's not bastardize the tool at hand with something that has a very real opportunity of intruding in the wrong way. So what we're going to do is we're going to just accept the fact that we have control over when the deposit lands, when the deposit's real revenue in hand as a result of closing a deal, and that's going to be the value of deals moving forward. Anything that we realize on the back half, when the project is completed, when the client is happy, that will just be treated as found revenue looking backward in our sales performance reporting later on. But we can't accurately forecast around it, and the valuation on deals for projects is going to be the value of deposits we receive up front as a result of the sales process. And then one-time transactions are one-time transactions, but you can see how all of these start to feather into a cumulative view where you can know the discrete billing periods within each contract or any sort of service with recurring revenue attached to it, and how they might stack up into your total revenue over the course of any period of time, so that moving from that Q1 target into the Q2 target, I have the added advantage of already knowing I'm going to receive 3 revenue periods worth of revenue from that contract that was already closed, and then I'm addressing the gap between that base load in revenue and what else there is to go and achieve in order to hit my final annual targets, or a 2-year target, or a 3-year target, and this starts to build on itself with a self-reinforcing mechanism of intelligence. The next biggest opportunity for improvement and time saved on the sales side of the house for people in these systems was document automation. The production of sales artifacts was killing us. In these 2 prior platforms, if you wanted to produce something like a statement of work, you more than likely would not have any of those service delivery details relevant to something like an assessment in place on any of the records, and would have to do a follow-up phone call or email with the client in order to then sell them something. And the time it took to do this whole process for contact information, for physical addresses, those kinds of things, meant hunting and pecking back and forth between those 2 platforms and building a document by hand in Word or some equivalent software by hand for multiple hours until you could get it out and into an e-signature platform like DocuSign to mark it up for the placeholder fields and the signature lines before sending it out. The process was overly cumbersome. It was a drain on everybody, and it didn't reflect great on high ground when you had people who were really excited about getting started, or they were expecting something relatively quick so they could sign while they were still available, and the whole process took a minimum of half a day to turn around. So again, single biggest opportunity for improvement. You can see the diagram below is the final resting state of something like the assessment statement of work inside of the dynamic solution, where we have all of these custom service delivery details attached to an account record and new records, things like where to ship a vulnerability scanner in order to execute an assessment, and being able to dynamically pull and traverse the related records from that account and fill in those word templates I had discussed earlier with my tools and frameworks used. I created numerous dynamic word templates that could be populated with the account or contact information we're talking about here as a one-click event. Those XML parameters would be replaced with the associated record information, and people would be able to either download that statement of work or that mutual NDA and email it off to somebody, or send it right over to the Adobe Sign e-signature workflow and send it out to the intended recipients without ever leaving Dynamics as an event that took less than 30 seconds to complete. With all these things in place, the benefits start to stack. We're building momentum in pretty profound ways. So now it's time to go into the reporting side of the house. And I want to show off the Power BI reports that I built that caused a pretty drastic sea change in the way High Ground understood its sales operations and the kind of data that we had access to now that everything was coming together. Because prior to this, inside of Zoho Sales, because the dollar values, the valuations on deals weren't that trustworthy to begin with on this issue of recurring revenue versus one-time revenue and how that's being counted, everything immediately up downstream of that, any reporting that relied on that information was considered suspect. The quality of the forecasting was terrible. The quality of the sales performance in the past couldn't really be believed. And these reports were high level in nature, obscuring the lower level analytics that might actually inform day-to-day or week-to-week decision making. So this is where I want to start to show this off, and you can see the tangible impacts of it. Here we've got a sales dashboard indicating the pipeline to goal by revenue line, and this is a direct result of those sales playbook records I called out earlier, right? Each of these revenue lines has a stated threshold that we're trying to accomplish in the span of a quarter, and then you've got your closed year-to-date or your closed quarter-to-date metrics relative to that threshold, and you've got your weighted pipeline revenue taking the total open deals and their values multiplied by the probability of it happening to get some indication of velocity on how you're doing against that threshold and whether or not you're going to hit your targets. You've got a sales pipeline, true of every sales team ever, true of every CRM system ever, but with the added ability in that lower third to see what the dwell time is. How long are certain deals spending in each phase of the timeline so that you can nudge, you can start to exert more effort and attention into areas where they are languishing. You've got a performance breakdown by each revenue line. So you can see historic win and loss rates, and you can filter that historic performance to a specific period in time. You've got past marketing and sales campaigns that you've run. You want to see how performant they were then versus now versus overall. And you can see the same win and loss rates by industry. So you can know who's being best served and who's most hungry for the upcoming products and the work. And you can see the win and loss record, the win versus lost revenue and the total size of the deals reflected there over time for the product in question. You can also see the revenue by products, and more importantly than just the products themselves, you can see the underlying work that constitutes each product. What percentage of the time and effort that goes into delivering each product belongs to what category of work. So you've got a WCS breakdown, the work categorization structure that actually maps one for one back with our QuickBooks instance. So the billable work going out the door that shows up on an invoice in QuickBooks shows up here as a particular kind of work that if I were to hover over or click into any one of those colored bands, I could see what opportunity it belonged to when it was closed, what the product it was associated to was, and then at the macro level you can just see here what's the distribution of the kinds of work being done in the shop and what are people asking for, right? You can see with the nature of the colored banding how the distribution of colors change over time, because what people are asking for in the market and the kind of things that are selling are changing over time with changing needs in the industry and the changing audiences we're talking to, which is hugely informative for how you're going to continue into the future and what kind of revenue you're going to book And I'll call out specifically that this is both forward and backward looking because this screenshot was taken in 2021. You can see both elements at play here. You've got the forecasted amounts for 2022 and 2023 based off of work that's already booked up in contracts. And it's a question at that point of a gap between where I'm at for my base load in revenue and what I want to accomplish as some year-end number I'm happy with. And those dictates your targets. Or you can look backward and see, equally informative, how's the nature of the work changing and how's the nature of what we're selling changing, and how should I craft my message or change my attention accordingly. Here you can see a rough breakdown of the exact same data, but by industry. So you can know who your ideal audience is and who your money makers really are, so that you can treat them accordingly and actually pursue deals that are in these camps that you know have proven track records of revenue won. With regards to timeline, I was the sole implementer on this migration project, so I carried this from stem to stern in one fiscal quarter, starting in September of 2021 and ending on Jan 1 of 2022. Started with the solution exploration, discussing all of those requirements and getting my arms around what High Ground needed as part of its unique sales journeys. That's time at the whiteboard figuring out lots of areas of the business and what our options were, weighing dynamics against some other potential alternatives, but it was pretty clear right away. I mean, I had familiarity with dynamics going back to early years. It's a wide platform capable of a lot of customization. It's on a shared cloud resource base as the rest of our resources in Azure. It seemed like a pretty clear option and a compelling one. And so by October of 2021, implementation begins, and that's where all of the apartment moving happens, where we're pulling data out of those two prior CRM contexts, manipulating them, transforming them, and enriching them to a point where they're ready for import into Dynamics as a sandbox environment, making those customizations and those background processes, those roll-up calculations, building out that reporting for the sales forecasting and the sales performance. And by December of 2021, we're talking about the Adobe Sign integration, cutting over, getting out of the DocuSign annual license agreement, and bundling Adobe Sign with its billing into another similar arrangement so that it rolls over every year annually on a clean schedule. And by Jan 1 of 2022, it's time to shut everything down, turn off the lights. HubSpot and Zoho are both marked for death, and it's clean to jettison those away from the organization, and we turn on the lights for the Dynamics work that's been done so far as a production environment. Let everyone run around inside of it and see what they can do with it, and make heavy use of those sales automation tools right away. And then since then, it's been system maintenance and administration on my end, and most of that has to do with periodically refreshing the content of those sales reports, and then ensuring that everything's humming along smoothly for those background automation processes, and occasionally doing some data entry tasks like bulk automated uploads of the Vistage member records and things like that prior to Ken's events. All right, let's talk about final benefits and what we actually got. We got greater engagement for less effort. The average open rates rose from 15% to 45% roughly, and the time savings on that were enormous. It wasn't so much the performance of the individual emails as much as it was not having to go through and manually build lists and do this exercise for every single time we sent an email, when we could have journeys now. The example I showed in a slide earlier could be 6, 8, 10 emails in a chain. That's 6, 8, 10x whatever the average time savings per event was, and that could be an hour to 3 hours depending on who you're talking to and how much tweaking needed to be made in the contents of emails. So massive time savings, and because the follow-up is quicker, because your speed to the punch is that much faster, that ultimately is what dictated the open rates for a lot of these situations that kept the conversation going with a kind of lead that is already liable to cool down incredibly quickly if you go and read or watch the other case study I did on building a Vistage lead magnet. Forecasting abilities of an ERP without actually being an ERP. This is massive. I mentioned the fact that we don't want scope creep on this project. We can't accommodate all of the operational realities and keeping track of projects in the way that you might want to from a logistics perspective to get to that end answer on cash flow and revenue and how things are handling inside the organization, of what you're going to have to do from a sales perspective to keep on pace with your targets. So we were able to keep informed on a quarterly basis with the questions that were pertinent to sales, and also see things from nose to tail in the entire view of a contract in its lifetime at the same time in their own terms, being able to see total revenue won because the contract is there, it will continue to be there in the future, there's a signature on the dotted line, and at the same time, here's how much all of this stuff we've been selling contributes to the quarterly target and what we want, and how that shares in respect to the larger annual revenue goals of the organization. You can answer at all of those phases of analyses. Operational control, not having control over the data and being dependent on others to traffic, shuttle data back and forth between Zoho and HubSpot from a data provider that was pretty hit and miss with the regularity and the quality of those synchronizations, is no longer a problem. We have full custody over all of the data in one place where we can see it and manage it, and we can pull it out if we need to. The process of exporting or egressing from Dynamics as a solution in the future would not be nearly as intense going to one source of information than it would be for this moving forward. And we had $4,800 per year in savings, and while that's not an exceptional figure, High Ground received several entirely new process efficiency gains. You can see all of the capacity that was added as a result of this, and the quality on just basic day-to-day activities and people's lives being measurably better as a result of this lateral move, and a slight move down in terms of overall cost with the increased capacity is a massive benefit culturally to the organization as well. All right, thanks for sticking with me. Once again, my name is Ethan Barnhart, founder of Vulcan Digital Solutions. You see my contact info on the slide there. If you liked what you saw, if you want to see similar benefits in your organization, or you got something you want worked on, don't hesitate to reach out and let's have a conversation. Thanks, and stay safe.